Welcome back in the press row. Jonah Siegel here. It is a Monday post Canada Day. It is July 5th, which in the States is July 4th. I hope I haven't completely confused you yet on what day it is. And yes, my producer, Mike, gets very mad at me for giving the date. I think it's important to get grounded. And my guest today is going to make very bold predictions about hockey games and upcoming seasons. We want to be able to hold her feet to the fire with her bold predictions. We are thrilled to have one of the first announced play-by-play voices for the new broadcast on ESPN coming the NHL this coming fall. She is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She is Leah Hextall. Leah, how are you?
I'm great, Jonah. How are you doing? It's July 5th, right? Just to really dig into your producer, I'll say the date one more time.
It is July 5th, but because July 4th landed on a Sunday, we're actually honoring it today on the 5th. So it's a holiday south of the border, and very happy to see you and happy to speak to you. We've talked a few times on Twitter, but we've never done a podcast. So really glad to have you. First and foremost, how are you? How's your family? Everybody doing well in whatever stage of pandemic everyone in your life is in?
Everyone's doing really well, and we're very fortunate. Everyone in my family is double vaccinated now. It took us here in Manitoba a little bit longer. We got hit really hard with the third wave, so we are just starting to get out of a shutdown, a complete shutdown, which was our third one throughout the pandemic. We were one of those rare breeds where at the beginning of the pandemic, we had 7 cases for like months, and then suddenly we got hit like everyone else did. And then that third wave, we just didn't get those vaccinations out quite quick enough, but done it now, and we're close to having herd immunity, and I think we're going to continually keep opening up here, and I can't wait to be sitting on a patio with all my friends drinking a beer like we do here in Manitoba summers and not having to think about COVID anymore.
Well, the good news, having been there last summer for a couple of days, is that this time of year it stays light till 10, 11 o'clock at night, so the patios will be able to make back a little bit of the money they've lost during the shutdown.
Let's hope so, and I will help them do it when that time comes.
So you have an awesome background, very inspiring. You started in the hotbed that is Flin Flon, and then you moved to Brandon at a young age. Is that correct?
Well, I actually was born in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, and I think I confuse people a lot because I was born in Portage, lived there till I was 4, moved up north to Flin Flon, Manitoba, which is just a gorgeous place to grow up. Did a lot of camping, fishing, a lot of outdoor activities up north. That's how I grew up. And then my parents moved us down to Brandon when my sister and I were 11 and 13, respectively, because our sports, we were starting to make provincial teams and whatnot, and it was just such a long trek to come down to Winnipeg, where is the center of the universe in Manitoba, where everything goes place. So we moved to Brandon, and I moved to Brandon at 11, and it's just, to me, that's home. That's where I'm from. It's where my folks still are. It's where my sister still is. It's where so many of my incredible high school friends are that I've known for 20 plus years. So I consider myself a Brandonite at the end of the day.
And they still have the greatest name in any sport, and the Wheat Kings. I was crushed when I was there last summer to see that they no longer have the amazing logo of the 70s and 80s that they used to have. But so you went to school, you graduated, and then you did pretty quickly get into journalism covering sports there in Brandon.
I did. I was one of those people who, like so many, I find it crazy that we expect people at 17 years of age, as they're graduating, maybe 18, to know what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. And I was told by everyone I should become a lawyer. And so I went into university thinking that's what I would do. And I hated every second of my first year of university. And it showed in my grades. And it really did. I think actually I was on academic probation after my first year. And it had nothing to do with me partying too much, although I did do a little bit of that too. But it was just because I truly did not want to go to class because nothing spoke to me. So after that, I decided, hey, I was paying for my own school. So I was like, this is coming out of my pocket. I'm going to work. And so I moved out of my parents' house, moved to Winnipeg to live with my sister who was going to school. And I started just to serve tables. And, it became very clear very quickly, something that my parents had taught me was do something you love. because, you know, if you don't love it, it's always going to feel like a job. So basically do something you would do for free. And that became apparent very quickly to me, that serving tables and doing that type of work was not for me for the rest of my life, and I needed to get it together. And that's where I married my two loves. I grew up playing sports. I come from an athletic family. I loved athletics my entire life. It's such a big part of who I am. And then the other side of it is that I've always been involved in the arts. I'm, you know, classically trained in piano. I sing, I do plays, I love drama. Public speaking, I was one of those kids who entered public speaking competitions. Nobody does that at, you know, 12 years of age, but I loved it. So I put them together, and I really felt I needed to get out of Manitoba to grow a bit. So I went to a school out in Vancouver, took a year of broadcast. I was one of those lucky people that, you know, banged on the door of CKX and Brandon a couple times while I was going to school. They remembered me, had an opening, called me up, interviewed, got the job at 23. And that was such a gift, because I was in a small station where you just did it all. And covering those Brandon Wheat Kings was my very first beat.
So you do that, and you do that for several years, and then you end up in the big city, right? Like you end up. Oh, we lost you. I think you're back for a sec. So you do that for a couple of years, and then you do end up in the big city. You ended up in Winnipeg. Is that correct?
I did. I was in Brandon for 2.5 years, and it was, you know, timing, as they say, is always everything. And during the lockout, I believe it was 04, 04, 05, that year was the lockout. And so junior hockey was really thriving in Canada because we had no NHL to talk about. And the Brandon Wheat Kings actually went right to the final for, you know, the Western Hockey League. So suddenly there were all these media outlets there. And the person who was sitting beside me happened to be from CTV Winnipeg and informed me that they were looking for someone, and also, you know, kind of elevated me to their program director there. And I ended up getting an interview in 2005 in June, moved my way up to CTV in Winnipeg, and was there for 7 years. You know, and in that time covered the American Hockey League, the Manitoba Moose, who were the affiliate for the Vancouver Canucks. And then in my very final year in Winnipeg, we received the Jets back here in Winnipeg. And that was just a huge, huge moment. I'm so thrilled that I got to cover that story, because I didn't grow up a Jets fan, because my cousin was playing for the Philadelphia Flyers.
We may have heard of him once or twice before.
Ron Hextall. Yes, my cousin Ron was playing for Philly. So that's who I cheered for. I wasn't a Jets fan. Whenever I came to Jets games, they were usually to watch him, and I was in my Flyers gear. But I know how much this team, and losing that team, how much it affected this province in so many ways. It was like the heartbeat went out of it. We just flatlined. And the day in which I sat at that press conference and saw Gary Bettman come in with Mark Chipman, and that they and Mr. Thompson, and they announced that the team was returning, you almost wanted to cry, because you knew how much it meant. So I had a year of covering the Jets, and the next thing you know, I got a really big break in 2012, and I went to Boston to work for NESN, and that just kind of, you know, when you're in Boston covering sports, and you know, the Bruins went to the Stanley Cup, you're covering Tom Brady and the Patriots, and most importantly, I covered a World Series as the Red Sox won. And you know, when you have that type of experience, it takes you to another level in the industry, where people who kind of thought they knew who you were in Winnipeg now look at you in a different way, because you're handling such major sports teams and stories in a major market in the United States.
Okay, so winning follows you. So you know you go to Brandon,
That's
and
what I meant by that, Jonah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
they win a championship. You make your way to NESN. Movon, I believe it was Movon. When you know, no, not Movon. It was Big Poppy. They won the World Series that year, and you were there right after the unfortunate marathon bombing.
There during it. For a Canadian, it was incredibly crazy. And when I first got there too, the shooting in Sandy Hook happened. And so, you know, not to say that things don't happen in Canada, but you know, it's a very different culture up here. And there were moments where I was somewhat like, where am I?
You're certainly not in Flin Flon anymore.
Exactly, right? You know, I'm not sitting here looking outside at pine trees, you know, in the isolated north. But you know, again, that plays into the experience, and seeing how, you know, Boston rallied after that. And that really was such a huge part of the Red Sox run, you know, the bearded brothers, and they all grew the beards. And I remember doing a story on it, and just the way it brought that community together after such tragedy, then to, you know, have that win. It truly was important. And I was actually covering the rolling rally for the parade, and Big Poppy got out, and right at the marathon line, and that's where I was stationed. And, you know, he got out and had a moment there with the team, and it really was quite special.
It was so special that I do believe that you have a World Series ring to your name.
I do. I have to say it's probably one of the greatest keepsakes of my career. Nesson was so kind, and Nesson, as some may know, some may not, the network is actually owned by the Red Sox majority owners, and then also by the Boston Bruins. And when they won, they gave those who were covering the team, they even sized our fingers up, and it's got Hextall written on it, and it's got all the year and everything that happened, and it's such a beautiful gift in a beautiful little box. And I'll never wear it because it's about as big as my hand, and it doesn't quite have the bling that the players do. Obviously they actually earned it, unlike myself, but what a gift it was by Nesson to have. And it was, I received my ring actually just about a month before I left to come back home to Canada to start working for Sportsnet.
So I'm going to disagree with you and tell you that you earned it. You didn't earn it on the field playing, but you absolutely earned it, and good on you for having it. And I hope that you're able to pass it on, enjoy it in your life, and pass it on. As I understand, your dad passed on his ring to you. Is that correct?
Yes, my dad, unfortunately, Randy, he passed away in the summer of 2019. Actually, July 12th will be his 2 years since we lost him. And he was the baby of 5. And his father, Brian Hextall, is a Hall of Famer for the New York Rangers. He won a Stanley Cup in 1940 and led the NHL in scoring and was quite a player in his day. And so my dad, when he lost his father, was received his Hall of Fame ring. And when I lost my dad, he left it to me. And I wanted to take it out of the box. Unlike the World Series ring, that ring means a lot. It's beautiful. It's not nearly what the rings are that the players have today. It's more of a signature ring. But I got it sized by a jeweler here who was very good about it, and I did a beautiful job. And every game I call, and the first time I wore it actually was my first NHL game with Sportsnet back on March 8th of 2020. And it was the first time I got to wear it, and it connects 3 generations of Hextalls, and it's one of my most prized possessions.
So I what you've left out unintentionally is that along this journey, you're not a broadcaster, you're a journalist. If that's the right distinction, I think it is. You're certainly not doing play-by-play. And if it's not for things going array and you coming back to Canada, you going to Sportsnet and doom and gloom hitting the industry, I'm certain an oh shit moment, what have I done? You wouldn't be here. We're talking about being on ESPN. You were a journalist. You were not the play-by-play girl or gal or woman, person.
Yeah, I'll take all of those, all of the above. No, the majority of my career, I was a studio host or I was a reporter. Field side, rink side reporter. That's what I did my entire career up into the 15th year when I was working for Sportsnet Hockey Night Canada in a host role and doing some ringside, and the bottom fell out. You achieve, and when I walked through the doors at CKX and Brandon, the dream was to work for Hockey Night in Canada, and here I was finally getting that ability. And as you mentioned, the industry took a turn, and they had paid massive money. I believe it was $5.2 billion for the rights for 12 years, and they had to do layoffs, and that's part of it, and it sucks. And I remember receiving that phone call, and you just, you hit the floor because you think, what am I going to do now? But, you pick yourself back up, and then it gets even worse when you're sitting there going, well, listen, I have an agent. I have a really long resume. I've done all of these things in my career and done it the right way. No one gave me anything. I came from a small place, small market, middle-sized market, major market, worked in the States, worked in Canada, covered every league there is in the major 4 and college sports. So this should be okay. And then it's not, and you can't get hired. And I had to audition, and I was up for jobs. Vegas was coming to the league. I was close there for a job and, didn't get it. And everything just wasn't working out. And suddenly the season started and I didn't have a job in the industry. And at that time, I was living with my mom in Brandon, Manitoba, 37 years of age on unemployment. That's where my life was. And I remember, Jonah, I had a moment where I just hit the floor and started to cry. And that's very unlike me. I don't have pity parties, and I just couldn't get up. I just wasn't strong enough anymore to handle it. because you really, what you do when you are a broadcaster, and it's our own ego, but it becomes so much a part of you. I'm Leah Hextall, the sports broadcaster. That's how people have known me for the last, 17 years of my life at that point. And now I just failed. That's how you feel. I just felt like a failure. And so I pivoted and I had to go get a real job. I'm living in Manitoba, started utilizing my network, and I ended up working for the Premier of Manitoba and got into politics. I know nothing about politics, nothing. But somehow my communications background and all those little special skills that you get from being a broadcaster, they're transferable. The next thing you know, I'm a director of a department. They've created a department around my ideas. I'm working for him. I'm running his campaign when he runs, along with a couple other people in the inner circle. And I'm actually having a lot of success in this new world and enjoying it as well. Like really, using muscles I've never used before. But at the same time, I don't love it. It's not my passion. My passion is broadcast. And when I got that job and solidified, okay, you can afford to live now, you have a paycheck. That's when I really did some searching and I thought, what am I going to do? And the fact is, Joan, is that our industry had changed. I had to look at my age. I had to look at my pay scale. I had to look at my experience. I was being phased out, or I felt like I was in those roles that I had traditionally held. I'm also at that point in my late 30s, knowing that we don't see a lot of 50 plus women on camera. And that's just the reality of it. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. So I got strategic about it as well. And I thought, how can I make sure that I'm no longer a dime a dozen as a host and reporter, because there's, so many people who are so excellent in that realm. How do I make myself stand out? And I put one and one together to make two, and I came up with Play-by-Play. I'd always wanted to try it, never had the time to work on it. Now I did. And that's how it began.
So how does a director in a political office try it? Do you go to the local kids rink and say, let me sit up in the box with the microphone? Like, what do you do?
Well, Jonah, you pick up the phone and you call Doc Emrick, first of all. And, I hate to, name drop like that, but that's what I did. I said, there's no playbook for this. There was nobody I could that I trusted really, because I was also scared to say it out loud that I was going to attempt this. Because what if I couldn't do it? What if it, it's such a hard skill. And I see, there's so much humility when I say, oh, I decided to try play-by-play. But I reached out to Keith Jones, who I had a relationship with when I was in Boston, because I wasn't watching Hockey Night in Canada anymore. I really fell in love with Doc's call. And I thought, would he be willing to talk to me? And Keith said, let me ask. And, of course, I was on the phone with him like the next day. And he was the one who told me when he first started, he'd just go to any rink, junior games, and just start calling. Just start calling and just start trying it. So when Doc talks, you listen. And I have a relationship here because I worked so many years in Manitoba in the broadcast industry with the Jets and the Manitoba Moose. And Moose games, the press box isn't full. So I asked them if they would open a booth up for me. And I started on my weekends, whenever the Manitoba Moose played, I would go to their games and record myself on my phone. And that's how it started. And then, even though I was horrible, I loved it. And I just decided, it's time for a women's voice to call the women's game. And I knew that Sportsnet had a small Canadian Women's Hockey League package. And I felt like that would be a safe space to try. But were they going to be open to it? Well, the same gentleman who called to lay me off, Rob Corte, I picked up the phone and called him, because when I say that it was a layoff because of finances, I'm not lying. My relationship with Sportsnet was prime. And he was so open to it, as was Scott Moore at the time, who was senior to him. And they gave me a little audition at a Brandon Wheat Kings game that I had like 2 days to prepare for. So I barely knew the names and numbers. I was, again, not good. They got me a color person even to help me out. And they said, she's got something. And they opened the door of opportunity. And then from there, it was up to me to really work at it and start. And that's how it started, calling the women's, led to ESPN giving me an opportunity at the NCAA tournament, the first woman to call that. That was such a beast, because you're learning 4 teams in 4 days, and you're calling back-to-back games, all these new experiences for me. And, and I just kind of kept trucking along and called the women's package again. And unfortunately the league folded, and then I got trouble to find games. So again, reached out to the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, who I have a relationship with here, and just said to them, do you guys have some games I could call? And so I'd work during the day, and at night I'd come home and study 2 teams. And on a Saturday night, I'd drive to Steinbach, Manitoba, and Dave Anthony, who's their usual play-by-play guy, would step aside. So wonderful of him to be my color person so that I could call online. And this is what I did. And that's the only reason I am going to be working for ESPN in the fall, is because of all these incredible support systems that I had around me. And as I say that to you, I'm thinking there's no wonder I'm single, because I was literally working all day, and then my evenings were taken up, and then going to small towns on the weekend to call hockey games. But my goodness, I loved it. And I love to see the progression, and it's kind of worked out now.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you again, because clearly, listen, a network is fantastic, but a network can only open a door. And it sounds like you were putting some pretty serious kilometers on your cars. And I think one thing that everyone would agree is that you're not lazy. So you weren't looking for things to come to you. You decided what you wanted and you went after it. And, I think, as we talked about, lots of people tell kids you can be whatever you want. And I think realistically, it's just not true. There's certain things you're just not, you don't have the genes, you don't have the DNA for, what have you. That's okay. But you certainly grabbed something and persevered through it. Yada, yada, yada. You're now one of the voices of ESPN hockey.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I love it. I have lots of kids, so I love them. So you're right. And I think, I think that's something that I've been kind of making sure is very clear when I've been speaking to people, because a lot of people have spoke about, oh, well, wasn't it so hard being a woman to, get this opportunity? And, there's no one standing in front of the booth at the door of the play-by-play booth and saying no women allowed. And I go back to your point there. I had to make a choice that this is what I wanted to do. And then I had to execute, and I had to persevere, and I had to pursue it. And in that pursuit, there's adversity. And I had to overcome it. I had to decide, how much do you want it? And trust me, there were times I wanted to quit. This year during COVID, when I didn't have a single game on my schedule for over a year, I was like, this might be done. I do the NHL game, I've got stamina and, momentum building. And then suddenly the world collapses 2 days later after I called that NHL game. And I kept thinking, what's going to happen? But then I get the NCAA tournament again with ESPN, and I end up calling UND and UMD at the Fargo Regional. And it's a 5 overtime thriller, the longest game in NCAA tournament history. And it created such a buzz, which I'm still, I can't believe the support that I received from the general public. But I stood in there for 8, periods, 6.5 hours of hockey. And before that, Jonah, even in myself internally, when people would ask me what you do, I would never say I'm a play-by-play. I would say I'm a sports broadcaster, because I don't think I believed it, but after that experience, what that did for me mentally is huge, because I thought, if I can call a game for 5 overtimes that has that much meaning to it, I'm a play-by-play. And it was also what sealed, in my opinion, the deal to ESPN too, that she can do this. And they took a swing at me. And, listen, not everybody's willing to take a swing. So I'm pretty thrilled that they were willing to do it. And now I know that as much work as I've put in, it's really just starting. And I'm okay with that, because I can't wait to keep working, get consistent repetition, and see where I can go. Because I only feel I'm at like 50% of my ability in the play-by-play role, and there's a lot of room to grow.
Well, you know what? I tell people all the time that everything happens for a reason. And that is true, even at those dark moments when you're crying on the floor, wondering where the next paycheck is going to come pay for the next meal. This was always around the corner. And if it wasn't for getting laid off at Sportsnet, and if it wasn't for having to get into politics, and if it wasn't for figuring out that wasn't for you, you wouldn't end up where you are today. And that's fantastic.
And I think the other piece of that, Jonah, too, and especially for women, and this is something I talk about when I speak, is that I also asked for these opportunities. I didn't sit back. And I think for so much of my career, and I can only speak from my experience, but we know from the data, even when women apply for a job, they feel that they have to check every box in order just to apply, where a man will have 50%. And he thinks, yeah, I can do that. And he has the confidence to. It's the way in which we're raised in, a societal way. And, it's do a good job, get the gold star, you'll be noticed, and things will happen for you. But that's not the way it works. I had to ask Sportsnet for the opportunity. They would have had no idea that I wanted to do play by play. The worst they could say was no. And then I move on and I try to find somewhere else that's going to let me do it. And I would have. I know I would have. But I'm fortunate that they did. And then from there, saying to my employer, to the Premier of Manitoba, I'll come work for you, but you got to sign off that I can still do this. I'll use my vacation time, which I did. Whenever I went to call games, I was using vacation days. Like, that was my vacation, was going to call games. But asking them, saying, this is how it's going to work for me to achieve what I need to do. And I think that's something that especially women need to take away, that you need to ask for your opportunity, because that's the only way you're going to find your yes. And, in those opportunities, other opportunities come from them. And then you continue to build. And then something like Mark Gross from ESPN calls you up and says, Leah, we're going to make you an offer. And it's going to be play-by-play for the NHL. And, you almost lose your mind, but you try to keep on the phone. Oh, thank you. That's really great. But really inside, you're exploding.
Well, it's fantastic. So one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Your cousin, I guess it is, has a reputation of being, his days playing for Philly were, let's say, interesting. What's he like? Now he's a general manager again in Pittsburgh. Was he like that as you grew up? You're similar age, he's older than you, but was he like that growing up?
Well, first of all, he's a lot older than me. Just like, let's be clear, he's really old.
Just in case he's listening.
Yeah, I was Ron's flower girl actually when he got married, and he's always teased me my whole life, but that's to be expected. But it's interesting because I know how fiery Ron was, but that's really a quality of our family. We are extremely competitive people. Even I have a switch where I get to a certain point and I see red, and I call it redlining. It's just the way we are, and especially when we play sports, we're ultra competitive. But Ron off the ice is one of the most level-headed people you'll ever meet. I mean, it's what makes him such a good GM, is that he's not reactive, which you would never think because of the way he reacted on the ice, right? So it's really Jekyll and Hyde with him, but he's very calm demeanor. He's, almost soft-spoken when you talk to him. He's got a dry sense of humor. So it really, I think, surprises people when they actually meet him, like, wow, he's calm. So, and that's what makes him successful in the role that he's in now. And I'm truly hoping I get to call a game in Pittsburgh, so I get a chance to see him.
I'm not going to let you say Doc, because you've already talked about him, but when you call games, who's the inspiration, if anybody?
I don't think I have one, Jonah. And that's the interesting thing. I'm still really trying to find my call and my voice. All my goal calls are different. I don't think I'm ever going to have some standard call or standard saying, because that's, you see things in people which you love in the way they do things. Like, I've really been watching Chris Cuthbert right now with Sportsnet, here in Canada. And he's calling his first Stanley Cup final with everything he's done in his resume. It's his first Stanley Cup, and how special is that? And he's so good, and he calls so many different sports. And what I do is I watch, whether it's John Forsland or Chris Cuthbert, or, I remember Bob Cole, and I watch how they set up a game. How do they begin it? And I write down different things that I like. I hear things that different play-by-play say. I'm a big Brandon Burke fan. I think he's just such one of these incredible voices that is going to continue to excel. And I see words and phrases they use, and I write them down in a notebook of language, because that's the hardest part for me in play-by-play, is really getting the verbiage, because hockey's the same game. Like it's the same plays over and over and over again. And you have to find a way so that you don't keep saying, to the line, fires it in, shoots it in, floats it in. You're wanting to think of all these different ways. So that's how I watch games right now is I kind of watch to hear phrases and sayings and different things. And, Chris Cuthbert taught me this playoff. This is what I learned is that, when they had the hit on John Tavares in the first round, he was calling it against Montreal. And, when he was down, all the trainers came out for both teams and he knew every name. And I'm not saying that maybe a producer isn't helping him out because they are our lifeline. But what I learned from that and I wrote down is know the trainers. Know what they look like, know their names. So I'm never going to do a game again where I don't know every single trainer, that I don't know who their doctor is, because you don't know if that's going to happen and you don't know. And he was prepared. And so to me, those are the type of things I look for right now when I'm watching play-by-play is, how can I utilize what they do so well to make myself better going forward?
Well, I'll jump in as a critic. The one thing that I think he did really well that game, especially on that hit, is he didn't overtalk, and he let the picture tell a story, and they did that really, really well. And I know they took a lot of heat for re-showing the replay over and over and over again. It did bring back memories of Joe Theismann all those years ago on Monday Night Football. But I will say that just sometimes letting the picture do the story, and Chris, who's been on the podcast that night, he did it exceptionally well. And I wrote about it on Twitter and I wrote about it on the podcast on the blog. But yeah, I think you'll find your groove, and I'm hoping that Matt Devlin, also a good friend of the show, he is not a musically trained singer, but he has been known to be caught singing during games, especially Sweet Caroline with Big Jack. So I'm hoping that we're going to hear you singing. You've now told us you're a professionally trained singer, so hopefully.
No, I'm classically trained pianist. I am not a professional. Let's be really clear about that. I've done some singing, but I don't know if anybody really wants to hear it.
Well, it's great to see you. It's great to talk to you. As I said, I think the last time we spoke was really during the layoffs at Sportsnet. It's awesome that you've bounced back. I hope that you get to do a Kraken game. I hope we get to see you up in Seattle. I'm sure the worldwide leader will be doing a game there at some point, and we'll find a patio in Seattle and we can meet face to face. But really hope you enjoy the rest of the summer. Bold prediction for tonight. Tonight's game is Game 4. Montreal up against it for sure. God has seemed to be a little bit ungodlike between the pipes. So what are you thinking?
It's just so hard to see how Tampa has played against them and not think that Tampa can sweep this series. They have just been so dominant, not just offensively, but also that defensive structure. And they just have a goaltender that just steals games if he needs to, like he did in Game 2. I hate to say it, but I think Tampa might be joining that very elite group that sweeps the Stanley Cup final.
And do you think?
And it breaks my heart a little bit because I really I'm not a Habs fan, but I'm a Carey Price fan. He wins us gold medals here in Canada. He's a Hall of Famer and he deserves a Stanley Cup, but so many of the greats deserve Stanley Cups and never get them. So I guess that's the hard part of the game.
Do you think there's a small part of us that is rooting for it to end just so the off season can start as well?
I think sometimes every broadcaster gets to that point, especially in this year where even though there hasn't been as many games, it feels like it's been a really long season. And I think we are excited. I know I specifically am for next season to start, not just because I'm going to be a part of it with ESPN, but because we're going to start in October. We're going to do 82. We're going to get the divisions back to normal. So, not to put an asterisk because this cup is this cup. You win it, you win it. But, I don't think anyone's going to be crying if it ends tonight, except for diehard Montreal fans.
I know a lot of people who will be crying if it ends tonight.
Yes, so do I, including my brother-in-law. He'll be sitting there in his sweater tonight, just cheering him on. So I would like them to win for all of their fans, but Tampa's just real good.
Yeah, I just think that the condensed off season is going to be very interesting and very exciting.
Yes.
And
especially with Seattle coming into your point. I mean, we're going to have a lot of movement.
yeah, we're 16 days away from
Yep.
the expansion draft and all that stuff. So listen, it's great to see you again. I hope you enjoy the rest of the summer, and we can't wait to see you on the Worldwide Leader. And congratulations again for everything that you've accomplished.
Well, Jonah, thank you for your support. And this has been so much fun. Thank you for having me on the pod.
Well, we will have you back on when you come up for air at some point next season.
Great.